Welcome back to Hudson Appliance for another episode of Wicked Good Food. I'm your host, Matt Williams, and today we're going to talk a little bit about Julia Child. On August 15th, Julia Child would have been 100 years old. And she was an inspiration to me in my cooking, more in that she inspired my grandmother in her cooking. My grandmother Williams just recently turned 92 years old. I actually have here her copy of Mastering the Art of French Cooking, which she gave to me not too long ago. And I actually have volume 2, which she gave to me not too long after that. So I thought it would be a nice tribute to Julia Child and to my grandmother to make a couple dishes out of here reflecting more or less Julia's way of cooking, but also make some dishes that my grandmother likes. And I'm going to bring them home to my grandmother. So she loves soup. So I went looking through a couple of books, and I ended up picking 3 soups from her first 2 books, The Mastering Art of the French Cooking. And I chose to do a cream of asparagus soup, a French onion soup, as well as a potato leek soup. Each of these in her books have a whole bunch of different variations. You make like a base recipe, a master recipe, and then from there you can add different things to it, like a mother sauce. But we're going to start out with our onion soup. At the end, we're going to garnish our onion soup with some big hunks of bread. To start with, I've cut a loaf of French bread into pieces about 1 inch or so thick. I only have 6 of them, and you'll see why I don't have too many. But I'm going to pop these right into the oven. Now the recipe calls for 325 degrees, but since I'm using a convection oven today, I'm going to turn it down to 300 degrees. And we're just going to let them cook and let them dry out. So to start with, this French onion soup recipe is supposed to take about 2.5 hours. We're going to take some of that time. You won't have to sit there and watch all of it, but it's all about developing flavor. That's what it was all about. Let me turn this down. So what we're going to do is add about 3 tablespoons of butter to this enameled cast iron pot. And I'm going to add a little bit of extra virgin olive oil, about 1 tablespoon or so, and let that start to melt. Then I'm going to cut up our onions. I've already started. I've peeled some onions. And what I did was, normally when I'm cutting onions, I only cut one end off. If you remember, I leave the root end on. But for making a julienne, kind of like this, I cut both ends off, and I use my knife, and I'm cutting directly through the onion. Like so. And I'm going to take these onions and put them in here. We're going to let this cook. I'm actually going to do one more onion, because that's where most of the flavor of this soup comes from. And you would think it should. It's from the onions. But what Julia asks us to do is to let this cook over moderate heat for about 15 minutes or so. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to let these cook. And you'll notice onions are actually mostly water. They're going to cook down quite a bit. This pot's going to start out full almost with onions. By the time they're done cooking, it's going to be a very thin layer of very dark brown onions. So my grandmother is a huge fan of soup. Every time she eats soup, she says that she could eat soup for every meal, every day. And I believe her. And I like to give her a little bit of variety. So it'll be fun. We'll bring these 3 soups over to her. All right. So the next soup we're going to get started is going to be our potato and leek soup. So we're going to start out with some potatoes, which I've cleaned up a little bit. We're going to take them and peel them. No special technique to peeling potatoes. Get that skin off there. Now, for many dishes I cook, I don't peel my potatoes. If I'm making mashed potatoes, if I'm roasting potatoes, whatever. But there are some that it's really important, and this is one of them. Because the potatoes will have a different color. They'll have a little bit different flavor, and they'll certainly have a different texture with the skins on than without. And we're looking for a silky smooth texture. In her recipe, she has it 2 different ways. If you're going to make her master recipe of the potato and leek soup, you cook it in water. But if you're going to make the vichyssoise, which is a soup that's often served cold, then you're going to simmer it in milk. We're going to do a little bit of half and half. Not actually half and half, half water and half milk. All right, so we're going to peel our potatoes like so. And turn the heat up under this pot a little bit more. And then we're going to take these. They don't have to be a perfect dice. but I want them to be more or less the same size. That way they take the same amount of time to cook. So I'm going to take the potatoes and put them right in our pot. So I had the good fortune of meeting Julia Child a few times, actually. The first time was actually with my grandmother. It was a surprise that I did for her, but I heard that she was going to be signing over at the Barnes & Noble in Framingham. And I said, Graham, I have a surprise for you. We're going on a field trip. And at this point, I don't know how old she was. She was late 70s, early 80s, still living on her own. She lived on her own until she was 90. And we went over, and it was great. She had such a big smile on her face watching Julia Child, but it was funny because she wouldn't go up and talk to her. I'm like, come on, we waited in line to get our book autographed. And this is the book I had autographed. You can see her autograph here in the book, which is kind of neat. And there's the little ad, but you get the Julia Child autograph right there. And that was the first time I ever encountered her. And what a big woman. You know, and what a big presence, what a big larger-than-life presence, big smile. So that was very cool for me to see. All right, so the other thing that's going to go in here as our other flavor are leeks. So leeks are a member of the onion family. They're very mild, delicate flavor. I'm going to move these books out of the way a bit. So what I'm going to do is just remove the end here. And I'm going to take off any of the loose leaves that don't look good. And up here, there's awful lot of fiber. I don't want to use that. I'm going to come up to just where the green part is still tender. So about there, about where the leaves start to branch off. Then what I'm going to do is take these leeks and cut them in half the long way to expose all the different layers. And oftentimes you'll find a lot of sand inside here. So I'm still going to rinse them even though they look pretty clean. But I'm going to take these and just go through and give them a rough chop. Oh, I can smell the onions already. Oh, there's a little bit of peel. Let's get that up. That's perfect. So I'll do another leek here. But leeks are a great thing to cook with. These parts here still have an awful lot of flavor, although they're not often eaten as such. Throwing them into a soup or a sauce or a stock to add some more kind of understated onion flavor is fantastic. So move those out of the way. But washing the leeks is very important. Like I said, even though they look clean, don't trust it. And the way you wash them is you take just a pot of cold water, stick the leeks in there, mix them around real well, and let them sit. And any sand or dirt or anything in there will drop to the bottom of the pan. Then you just scoop the leeks off the top. So I'm going to move these aside, and I'm going to do one more prep piece for our other soup before we get too far. And that's for our asparagus. So the cream of asparagus soup. Now, one of the things that's great about Julia Child is that she took her interpretations of French cooking and introduced it to the United States, but there's an awful lot of work that she spends trying to get as much flavor as possible out of something. So we're going to take these ends of this asparagus, which are dried out a little bit and very fibrous. She wants us to cut about 1 inch off the end or so. And we're going to reserve these. But what we're going to do is we're going to cook these in the water that we're going to cook the rest of our asparagus in, so that we're going to suck the flavor out of them, even though we're not going to use them. So I'm just going to move these off to the side. And then we're going to take the tips of the asparagus and cut these off, and these are going to essentially be a garnish later on. Then all the rest of the asparagus is going to be pureed as part of the soup. So we're just going to take this and cut it into little 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch rounds. So I'm going to cut some more potatoes, some more leeks, some more onions, some more asparagus, and get ready to put our soups together. Then I'll show you how we put these together, and we'll see how brown our onions are getting. All right, so I finished some of the prep work. Our onions have started to cook down. They've cooked down quite a bit. It's been about 15 minutes. Now the next step here is to add about a tablespoon of granulated sugar to our onions, which are going to help caramelize and give a great flavor. And we're also going to add about a teaspoon of salt. Just sprinkle that on there and mix that around. Now it's supposed to cook again like this for 30 to 40 more minutes. So we're just going to let it cook low and slow. It smells awesome. I wish you could smell in here. So we'll leave that there. I'm going to turn the heat up just a little bit, just medium high or so. Now here in this other pot are our potatoes all cut up, and here are the leeks. So I've taken all those leeks, I put them in some cold water, and you can see all the stuff that's fallen out of those leeks into the bottom and how cloudy the water is on the bottom. That's good. That's not stuff you necessarily want to eat. So I'm going to take all our leeks and go ahead and put them right in here. Now there's no heat on yet. And just try to get rid of some of the water. The water's not that big of a deal. We're making a soup after all. All right, good. Now we're going to add a quart of milk, a quart of whole milk to this. And I'm going to let this start cooking like this. I'm probably going to add a little bit of water to it in a little bit, but we're going to let that cook down a bit. All right, so the next step for our asparagus soup, to start with some onion. So we're going to do some more slices of onion, like we did for our onion soup. And I have about 4 tablespoons of butter in that pan over there, and we're going to slowly sweat this. So we want to let it get translucent, but we want to make sure that it doesn't brown. Put that right in there. Now in this boiling water here, I'm going to go ahead and add all these ends of the asparagus. And we're going to suck some flavor out of here. Now, we had some pretty young, pretty good asparagus. So I'm not too worried about it not having a lot of fibers in it. But if you had thicker asparagus, a good idea is after you trim out the ends to take it and use a vegetable peeler. But in particular, in bigger asparagus, they get a little tough. And here we're going to let these cook down. Another Julia Child experience I had, my brother went to school in Fitchburg, went to a signing that she had at another Barnes & Noble, and got me a book signed. And that one is this one here. So it's cool, and it was her. It's the exact same signature. I'll show it to you again if you want to see it. So we were just talking here, and Donna, one of the owners of Hudson Appliance, mentioned that Julia Child actually got her appliances from Hudson Appliance. They ended up delivering them to her Cambridge kitchen. And I asked her if that was the same kitchen that's on display in the Smithsonian, and she wasn't aware of that. But we're going to have to check into that and see if some Hudson appliances are actually in the Smithsonian. Because it's really cool if you ever get a chance to go. They took Julia Child's kitchen in Cambridge and took it apart piece by piece and put it together exactly as it was. And I haven't been to the Smithsonian in a while, but it was cool. You could walk almost into it, and you could look, and you'd see Cambridge phone books, and you'd see takeout menus from local places. It was really cool. Oh, this is looking and smelling great. All right, we're going to take another quick break. I'm going to finish blanching these asparagus. We're going to let our onions sweat a little bit, and I'm going to add just a little bit of water to this soup, and we're just going to let stuff cook slow and slow. All right, so we've had a chance to let things cook a little bit. Our onions are still cooking down, getting some really nice color on them. One thing I didn't add to the potato leek soup was salt. And we're asked to put about a tablespoon of salt, which is quite a bit, but these are very subtle flavors from the potatoes and leek. And I did salt this asparagus water pretty well. So I'm going to take these asparagus ends out of the water. Get them all out of there. And then I'm going to go ahead and add all that cut asparagus. So this is the center part of the stalk. Remember, we took the very tips off, we took the very bottoms off. But now we're going to add the rest of this. And what's happening here is we're sucking some more flavor out of the asparagus. I lost one somewhere. One of the beauties of these induction cooktops is it doesn't get hot right there, so I'm able to pick that right up without burning myself. But we're going to let this cook for a couple minutes, pull some more flavor out, so that this is going to end up being the flavor of the soup. Now, we need to check out our bread. So let me pull this out. And the bread's looking pretty good. It looks pretty dry, which is good. Now, halfway through the cooking, we're a little more than halfway. It's recommended that we sprinkle some extra virgin olive oil on these, or some beef drippings. Wouldn't it be cool to just have beef drippings laying around to put on here? Unfortunately, we don't have that. So we're going to put a little olive oil just on top. Put these back in the oven, and we'll let them keep cooking. They're just about done, though. Now, our onions are getting a little bit more translucent here. Yeah, they look pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and remove the asparagus from here. Drain it relatively well. It's going to go in with our onions. And I'm going to turn the heat down on our onions and asparagus a bit. Because the next step over there is, remember how we used 4 tablespoons of flour? It might have seemed like a little excess in the flour, of butter. Might have seemed like a little extra butter. The reason we had all that fat in there is because we're going to make a roux. And the next step is to add the flour to make our roux. So, before I get too far, I just want to give this a stir. And just keep checking the bottom. Make sure we're not burning on the bottom. My goodness. It smells so good. All right, now I want to grab all the asparagus tips. Now this is going to end up being a garnish in the soup. But once again, we're going to get some more flavor out of these. So we want to blanch these quickly just to get them tender. So I'm going to drop this in the same asparagus water. Let those cook for a few minutes and then we'll pull those out and then reserve them for later. Whoops. Now here, I want to get everything coated with butter. And we're going to add about 4 tablespoons or so of flour. So this is going to be the thickening of our soup. Now, as with any roux, you want to let it cook a while. So we want to let this cook a good 10 minutes or so. Now the easiest soup here that we're making is this potato and leek soup. I mean, you haven't seen me do anything to it other than cut up potatoes and leeks, throw them in there and just let them cook. And that's all they're doing. They're just cooking. Not quite to a simmer yet, almost, but we're just going to let that cook down. So I didn't tell you about my coolest Julia Child experience yet. So when I finished grad school with a degree in culinary education and didn't have a job, so I moved to Colorado. Was a ski instructor for a couple years, which was very fun. But I moved back, and my timing happened to be perfect that some colleagues I had actually at the school that I work at now were members of the New England Culinary Guild. And they said, hey, Matt, do you want to go to have dinner with Julia Child? And I said, yes, I want to go have dinner with Julia Child. So it was cool. It was a pretty small group of people. I don't know if there were 50 of us or so, but it was pretty awesome to see her sitting there eating her meal. I sat right next, almost back to back with her at the table next to us. And of course she was served first. And you know, I guess when you're 80 some odd years old and you're the man, that you don't really wait for anyone else to eat. So she started eating, but it was cool. And I should have brought some pictures. But I have a couple pictures with her. It was just a cool experience having a little conversation with her. I actually won this really cool cleaver that night too. That's a really good memory. That was actually on September 10th, 2001. And September 11th happened afterwards. And believe it or not, I didn't forget about it, but there's so much stuff happened in the subsequent days that I kind of forgot about that whole experience until I found the menu not too long ago. And that was a really cool experience. All right, so we're going to take a little break. I'm going to pull these out so that they don't overcook. Let our roux finish cooking. We'll come back and we'll start to finish our soups. All right, so things have had a chance to cook down a little bit more and simmer. Our roux is all cooked here. The next step on our onion soup is to add about 3 tablespoons of flour. Now, I'm not used to having thickened onion soup, but this is kind of cool. It's going to give it a little bit more body to it. So I'm going to mix this around, because remember, we have our butter and our oil in there. So this is going to create a little bit of a roux. to let this cook for about 3 minutes or so. Now, in our oven, we want to pull out our finished croutons. They're nice and firm. The reason why we want them firm, we want to essentially evaporate as much liquid as we can out of them. I'm going to stick them back here. So that when we put them in the finished soup, they're going to absorb the flavor, they're going to absorb the liquid from the soup. Now the next step, while we were gone, our potato leek soup actually boiled over a little bit, so we turned the heat down a bit and we're going to let that cook. The next step here is to add actually I wanted to show you. See how green that is? That's all flavor that we got from our asparagus. But we're going to add this here. Now in Julia's recipe, she asks us to do it in a couple parts. The reason is so that we don't cook our roux instantly, so that it doesn't thicken and we don't get little roux balls in the soup. But this broth had cooled down enough that I didn't feel like it was going to thicken it instantly. So we just want to mix this around well. Another thing we're instructed to do is to be careful when we're pouring our broth in, and I think we can use a little bit more, but not to get any sand or anything that had fallen into the bottom of this. So let's see, let's turn this burner back on here. We'll let this come up to a simmer. Give it a stir every once in a while. Now back to our onion soup. We'll fast forward and say that's been 3 minutes. Now we're going to add our beef stock, or beef broth. So this is a low sodium one. If you have your own homemade stuff, that's the best. Once again, we're adding this to a roux, so we want to be careful that we don't burn it. We want to be careful we don't burn it, but that we don't put it in too hot, because it'll thicken that roux right away and you're going to end up with roux balls, which is even a bigger deal in this particular soup because this isn't going to be pureed or passed through a food mill or anything. So the recipe calls for 2 quarts. I'm not going to add quite 2 quarts because I'm going to change the plan a little bit when we go to serve it. And my plan is to actually serve it right in this container. So now we can turn the heat up on this. But look at that deep, rich color there. That's fantastic. Now we want to add a little bit of sherry wine to this as well. Half a cup or so. Most of the alcohol will burn off of that, but it's going to give a great flavor. All right, so we're at another point here where all we need to do is simmer. We're going to let this simmer until these vegetables are tender. This needs to simmer about 20 minutes, and this needs to finish simmering until all these vegetables are tender. When we come back, the soups will be all cooked, and we're going to puree the ones that are getting pureed, and we're going to finish this onion soup. Okay, so now a little time has elapsed. All our soups have simmered as long as they should have. One thing I did want to show you, anytime you're making a stock or a soup or a sauce, any foam you see coming up like this, go ahead and skim that off. It's nothing that's going to hurt you, but that's some impurities, and that's some stuff that may have actually caught little bits of dirt that might have been in there, or sand or something like that. But go ahead and skim anything like that off. So, now one of the ways to finish this soup is with some grated onion. So I'm going to grate some fresh onion. Whoops. I'm going to do about half an onion or so. And then go ahead and stick that right into our soup, like so. And then we're going to take some cut up Gruyere cheese, like Swiss cheese it says, but this Gruyere cheese, we're going to put that in there. And what I'm going to do with the ladle, we're going to mix this around just a bit. Now comes our croutons that we made. So we're going to serve this soup right in the vessel that it's in now. Oops. So I'm going to go ahead and put these right on top, like so. I don't know if I can fit all of them. I can break it, stick some pieces in there. And push them down just a bit. Then I'm going to cover the top with Gruyere cheese, like this. My goodness. Now this whole thing is going to go in the oven and bake for about 25 minutes. That's going to give that raw onion we just put in there time to cook a little bit. It's going to melt some of that cheese and the top's going to be all bubbly. So we'll get this in there. I mean, this soup here is a meal in itself. Now we're going to move over to our asparagus soup, which I'm going to slide over here. And the next step we're going to do here is we're going to puree it. Now, in Mastering the Art of French Cooking, she suggests sending it through a food mill, which is a machine that you push it through and it smushes everything through. But we have immersion blenders. So we're going to go ahead and immersion blend this. Once this is nice and smooth, there's one last thing we have to add to this. And I'll show that to you real quick. We'll get that a little smoother in a minute. But we're going to take some heavy cream and some egg yolks. Mix these together, and I'll use my immersion blender to mix these up. Mix these up well. Now this is the key, is that we slowly add some of this soup because we don't want to cook those egg yolks. We don't want to make scrambled eggs. So we add a little bit, mix it up, put a little more, mix that up. This is called tempering. Now we're at a point that all this heavy cream and egg yolk can go back in here. I'm going to add this back in. This soup simply needs to be pureed. We'll pull the other soup out of the oven and we'll see what Arthur thinks. Hey Arthur.
Hey Matt, welcome back.
Thanks for having me again at Hudson Appliance. So this show was my kind of a thank you to my grandmother and to Julia Child.
Okay.
All right, so we cooked out of Julia Child's book some dishes that my grandmother would really like. So we've got a nice French onion soup here, cooked low and slow. We're going to serve it right out of that pot. If you don't mind, I'm going to have you actually scoop some in there.
Okay.
I'm going to finish these other two soups. This is our potato leek soup. This is just going to get finished with some heavy cream. So this was pureed nice and smooth. I just used the immersion blender on this. Put that like so. Then on top of this one, I just have a little bit of chives, a little bit of fresh chives that I chopped up. We'll just kind of garnish like that. And then this last soup here, this is the cream of asparagus. So we're going to throw in some whole butter. Does that seem kind of a Julia thing to do?
Oh yeah.
All right, these last two bits of butter. If you want to go ahead and try that French onion soup, I heard that's one of your favorites, and I'll finish this one up. It's really important when you're adding whole butter that you mix it until it has a chance to emulsify. Otherwise, it'll just melt and bubble up at the top.
This is very good. This is very good.
Insert a little of this. I won't do too crazy. Well, let's go ahead and try the potato leek. See how that is? Oh, that little infusion of cream at the end.
Oh, that's very good too.
That's a good time. All right, and while we have time, we might as well see what we think. Good asparagus flavor.
Really good taste in that. Well, you know, that's wicked good.